desolate political agora following Trump's ascension to the American throne of cacophonic populismus, we find ourselves embroiled in a fugue state of epistemic despair, a melancholia magna, where dialogue devolves into rhetorical flotsam and substantive thought is rent asunder by disingenuous mimema.
Like, you ever play pretend with somebody? I think we've all had this friend, or maybe you guys were this person. You ever like play pretend with a person when you're younger and you're like shooting darts at each other, or you're doing or you're playing Legos, or you've got like a hero, and your friend always has like the most invincible character ever. And it's like, oh, he can breathe underwater and he can fly and he can, the people that made Yasuo, by the way, did this. No, I'm just kidding. But there's like a million things. And at some point it's just like, it's so disconnected that you're like, okay, this is like cringe. Like, I don't think I want to play with you anymore. Like, this is just dumb. You have like every single superpower or whatever. For some reason, like talking about politics with people, and especially watching some of the people, and I don't know if I guess maybe I blame them for this, like especially when you start reading or understanding anything, it's just so like boring and stupid. Like watching Tim Pool, like that conversation with Sam Cedar, like in my mind that should be almost like a career conversation. Like, you're so obviously dodging every single question. You're so obviously lying about things that you've received in the past. You're so obviously lying about the amount of money, whether or not it's comparable to any, like all of these are, but the fact that like there are tons of people that watch it, probably the majority that watch that sided against Sam, because it's just like, but it's not like we're disagreeing on, you know, what are the motivations for some leader to do whatever, what are the downstream impacts of some economic, you know, implemented policy, like what are the, it's not like these things where, okay, sure, reasonable minds can disagree and you can even have like a substantive argument. It's just like the most banal, and it's like, okay, I don't know, it just feels stupid. Like if somebody wants to argue, for instance, like if somebody wants to argue that tariffs will lead to a revitalization in, if somebody if somebody wants to argue that tariffs will lead to some long-term revitalization of manufacturing in the United States because it will force us to bring back parts of our supply chain, optimize them through capital and technological advancements, and overcome like the new price hurdle and give incentives for people that are manufacturing, like robots or more efficient machinery. Basically, now that you've created a certain price floor, these technology investments become more lucrative. So in a way, the tariffs are almost functioning as a form of like government incentive for domestic manufacturing, right? And so by all this, in the long term, tariffs will actually help domestic manufacturing, right? Okay, sure, that's an argument you could have. I don't know 100% if I would agree with it, but at the very least, you're standing on like historical ground, right? I believe that Japan used a lot of protectionist policies to grow their domestic manufacturing. Now, Japan produces like some of the most prestigious and hosts some of the most prestigious electronic companies in the world, right? But if you want to say like, well, tariffs won't raise prices on anything, and it's like, you understand that that's by definition, that is what a tariff is supposed to do, is raise prices, right? Like that's how it makes things more competitive. It's like if you have a tariff that doesn't raise a price, then your tariff literally failed. That doesn't make any, like, we're just like, it's such a world of, it's so cringe. Japan had the largest growth during the Meiji period when it liberalized and had very low tariffs. I haven't studied this in depth, but my understanding is post-World War II, Japan engaged in quite a bit of protectionist policy to grow its domestic electronics firms. I guess I could be wrong on that because I feel like I read that. I don't know how to also say that. Sorry, Meiji? Isn't that when Kenshin complained that he wasn't allowed to carry a sword anymore? I don't know. What about people who say it's all a negotiation tactic from Trump? Negotiation for what? What is he negotiating for? Everybody always says Trump does these things as negotiation tactics. What did he negotiate for? What did we get? Wait, what? Audio engineer here. Yeah, it's hard to avoid. Sorry, I'm like perfectly can't scroll on this message. Shock mount, of course, but besides that pad, the top of the desk, nothing stops the loads. Oh, I think just a shock mount would fix it. None of the mics in the studio are shock mounted. I should actually put that. I should get those shock mounts for studio mics.
Destiny, oracle of the digitally disillusioned, laments this cataclysmic atrophy of political engagement. Like children trapped in a Sisyphean sandbox of pretend, the actors on this stage wield arguments as if playing with invincible superheroes, untouchable, unbeatable, yet utterly unrelatable. Such farce is not debate, but cringe incarnate. The metaphor is simple but devastating. Once you realize the game is rigged, the sandbox feels suffocating. To sit through modern political discourse, destiny-averse, is akin to suffering fools parading their omnipotent, logic-immune constructs. Like an enfant terrible whose superhero can fly, breathe underwater, and obliterate galaxies, these pundits create arguments impervious to reason, unshackled by truth. And when the likes of Tim Pool artfully dodge questions or conjure fictions ex nihilo, the collective intelligence of the audience, and perhaps humanity itself, groans under the weight of such banal obfuscation. The frustration Destiny elucidates is no simple irritation. It is the existential angor of a man observing the collapse of coherent discourse. The tragedy lies not in disagreement. Indeed, disagreement in its purest logos can be noble, but in the fictio et mendacium peddled as debate. When presented with vacuous arguments that defy the foundational laws of logic, one cannot help but feel the pall of futility. Tariffs, for instance, exist to elevate domestic prices. This is their very raison d'etre. To deny this is not ignorance. It is an affront to rationality itself. At that point, one is no longer conversing but shouting into the void, a cacophony of futility that threatens to swallow both speaker and listener. It is here, in this abyssus cringe, that Destiny finds his disquiet. The discourse has become a theatre of prestige, where pundits like Tim Pool posture as intellectual titans but are merely actors reciting lines of mendacious sophistry. The spectacle is exasperating because it is prima facie dishonest. To deny economic principles or historical precedent in favor of performative grievance is to plunge the discussion into nihilistic absurdity. Destiny's mind recoils, not because he is bested in argument, but because the opposition refuses to concede the basic rules of engagement. What once resembled debate now mirrors a child stubbornly crying, "Naha!" to the laws of gravity. And yet, the greater tragedy lies in the audience, legions of gregari spectatores who cheer these hollow victories, ensconced in their tribal sanctuaries of self-reinforcing misinformation. Destiny laments this phenomenon as the death knell of intellectual honesty, for when lies become axiomata and evasion becomes strategy, the very foundations of civil society tremble. Like the court jesters of medieval folly, modern political commentators contort truth into grotesque shapes, provoking laughter from the crowd while poisoning the well of public knowledge. What began as earnest discourse descends into performative derangement. Destiny's despair reaches a crescendo when he contemplates the sheer inanities of it all. Arguments could be substantive. Tariffs, for example, could inspire rigorous debate on industrial revitalization and technological advancement. Historical analysis could reference Japan's protectionist policies post-World War II or their earlier Meiji-era liberalization. Such dialogue would elevate the collective intellect. But instead, the discourse devolves into a clownish simulacrum where people deny basic economic causality while waving flags of triumph. The political sandbox becomes unplayable when reason is no longer invited to the game. The spectre of Trump looms large here, not merely as a political figure, but as a cultural harbinger. His election cracked open the Pandora's box of epistemological chaos, where everything is negotiable, even facts themselves. His supporters, like children convinced of their hero's invincibility, shrug off reality in favor of comforting narratologica. The fallout is more than political. It is psychological, philosophical, even spiritual. Destiny describes a profound sense of solitudinum, trapped in a world where truth itself feels irrelevant. To engage feels futile. To disengage feels irresponsible. Such is the conditio humana of the post-Trump political maelstrom. It is in this emotional purgatory that Destiny's hint of depression emerges, a malaise wrought not from defeat, but from the tedium vitae of perpetual absurdity. The political arena has become a parody of itself, where winning no longer requires argument, but sheer volume of delusion. When every conversation becomes an exercise in deflecting reality, even the most tenacious interlocutors begin to feel the pull of resignation. The sandbox is unlivable. The superpowers are too absurd. How, then, does one find hope amidst such intellectual wreckage? The tragedy deepens when one considers that it was not always this way. Debate, Destiny reminds us implicitly, was once an art, an engagement of logos, ethos, and pathos. Disagreements could be meaningful, arguments could sharpen minds. But in the current landscape, dialogue is drowned in cacophonous nugae, a deafening noise devoid of substance. The intellectual battlefield lies abandoned, replaced by ideological mosh pits where no one emerges enlightened, only bruised. This state of affairs is not merely cringe, it is tragoedia modernatis. Still, Destiny's lament carries a subtle call to arms, an exhortation to seek veritas, even in the face of overwhelming nonsense. The child in the sandbox may be insufferable, but the adult must resist the urge to leave altogether. To abandon the fight for truth is to cede the field to the forces of ignorantia, an unforgivable abdication. Destiny's frustration, then, is born not of hopelessness, but of lingering hope, that rational discourse can still be salvaged from the wreckage. For in every shout of frustration lies a flicker of defiance. Destiny's despair is also his motivation, a refusal to accept the banality of nonsense as the new normal. His critique of the post-Trump landscape is both diagnosis and prescription, a brutal appraisal of the absurdity and an unspoken plea for reason's return. The sandbox may feel intolerable, but the solution is not to abandon play. It is to insist upon better rules. In the end, Destiny's melancholia is that of the thinker confronted by a world gone mad. The political game has become unrecognizable, the discourse absurdum ad infinitum. And yet, to give up would be the greater tragedy. For as long as there are voices willing to fight for logos, there remains hope, however faint, that the sandbox can once again be a place where truth matters. Destiny's exhaustion is palpable, his frustration justified, but his defiance, though unspoken, burns as a beacon for those who still value reason amidst the tempestus absurditatis.